Hey everyone, it's Victoria with Nutrition by Victoria, and I just wanted to address a question that I've been getting recently about salt and how much you should have in your diet, and if you should even have it in your diet. What is the deal with salt? So just briefly, a little nutrition information about salt or sodium. Salt is actually sodium chloride. Sodium is something that is essential in our diet that we need to regulate our blood pressure and blood volume. Together with potassium, it maintains our extracellular and intracellular fluid levels. And very interesting, I was reading up about sodium today for this video. We use a lot of energy, like 20 to 40% of our basal metabolic rate goes towards maintaining our fluid balance within our body, maintaining the sodium potassium pump system. Pretty interesting, right? So for a long time, I didn't have salt in my diet. I stuck to a really low sodium diet, like probably at least under 1,000 milligrams of sodium a day, probably more like 500 milligrams. And I felt good, but my fitness now is better having more salt in my diet. I actually recently increased my sodium intake, and I've noticed a big change in my ability to recover from exercise, and just my fitness output in general is better having more salt in my diet. And I think that's because my intake was too low for my activity level, and when your sodium intake is too low, your body actually retains water in order to retain salt. And so when you eat enough salt, your body lets go of that water retention that it was having to maintain sodium in your system. Now you're taking enough in, you don't need that anymore. But if you consume too much salt, and let's say you have high blood pressure or you're not active, then you can actually experience water retention and increased blood pressure from consuming too much salt. So what is recommended is to consume less than 2,300 milligrams of salt a day. This is for like the average person. If you are an endurance athlete, if you're underweight, if you have low blood pressure, you can eat as much sodium as you want. There actually isn't a tolerable upper level intake of it, meaning that there's no like known toxicity level for salt or sodium, because our body has the ability to flush it out pretty quickly and easily, so it doesn't become toxic in our system. And yeah, so it really is only watching your salt intake is contraindicated for people who have a history of kidney disease, high blood pressure, heart disease. And I think even in those cases, studies have been inconclusive as to whether or not sodium is actually playing a role in those diseases. It's suggested, but you know, most people when they're eating salt, they're eating it with highly processed animal foods, lots of fat, things like that. So, and those foods actually contribute more towards heart disease than salt does. So either way, I suggest consuming salt to taste. I only have salt with my starches, and generally in the form of condiments. I'm not using table sugar. I don't really I don't cook with salt. I'll add it afterwards, because you can't taste salt in like food that you've added it to, in my opinion. Because one time I made a soup and I was putting like soy sauce in it, and I couldn't taste it at all when the soup was done. But then if you add the soy sauce like on the surface of the food, then you can really taste it. My favorite condiments to use are soy sauce, barbecue sauce, ketchup. I still like to use lemon juice. And Tabasco sauce are my favorite condiments. I've also been enjoying salted pretzels, are a really great low fat, no fat snack. I recommend getting the pretzels that don't contain oil because some of them do. And same with bread, you know, sometimes it'll say that it's has 0 grams of fat, but a food item can contain up to 0.4 grams of fat per serving and be listed as 0. So just keep that in mind. Just go for the no oil options when available. And yeah, and if you don't want salt in your diet, don't have it. If you want a little, that's great. If you want, you know, some days you might have more and some days less. So just go based on what you feel is best for you. And yeah, salt isn't bad. It's essential for our health. And yeah, I think that's it for this video. If you have any other questions about salt, let me know in the comments below. And feel free to join my coaching group. I'll leave a link for that in the description. We talk about all this stuff on there. All right, have a good night. Bye, guys.